His heart dropped the moment he stepped into the apartment. The crib was still there. The soft stuffed bunny still sat in the corner. The baby blanket was still folded with care. But Selene was gone, and so was Arya. And the unborn child she carried, not his by blood, but already carved into his heart like family. She hadn't even let him say goodbye. Cassian stood frozen in the doorway, one hand still clutching the note she left behind. Her handwriting was shaky, like she wrote it through tears. He read it again, hoping the words would change. "Thank you for showing me what it felt like to be cared for. I won't be a burden. Please forget me." Forget her? The woman who had turned his cold apartment into a home? The child who called him daddy in her sleep? The unborn baby who kicked the moment his hand touched her belly? He couldn't breathe. Not when the only warmth he'd ever known just slipped through his fingers. If you're already feeling this story hit somewhere deep, pause for a second and do something powerful. Subscribe now and stay with us, because you're not just watching a story. You're feeling what it's like to lose everything and fight to get it back. Have you ever cared for someone so deeply that the thought of losing them made you feel like you couldn't move? That's what Cassian felt the night Selene disappeared. Not the man who built a billion-dollar empire, just a man standing in an empty room, asking himself how he let her walk away. Because when a woman has been left too many times, she starts to believe she doesn't deserve to stay. Selene didn't take much, just her daughter, her silence, and the fear that she'd fallen for another man who would change his mind. But what she didn't know was that he already had. He changed the first time she smiled without pretending, the first time she leaned into his chest instead of standing on her own, the first time she whispered, "Thank you for not asking anything in return, and if you stay with this story, just until the end, you'll see how a man who swore he couldn't love found himself learning to kiss stretch marks like prayers, learned how to braid a little girl's hair, and held a newborn with shaking hands, terrified, not of responsibility, but of never getting to feel this again. Don't just watch, feel it, stay. And if your heart's already stirred, don't leave without hitting subscribe. There's more to this story, and maybe more of yourself in it than you expect. Before the silence, before the scars, there was Micah. Selene was only 21 when she fell in love for the first time, and it wasn't the kind of love that crept up slowly. It hit her like a wave. Micah was the man every girl warned herself about, a smile too charming, dreams too big, and words that made broken things sound beautiful. He played music on street corners like he was born to be adored. He said things like, "We'll be the kind of family that never walks away," and Selene, young and wide open, believed him. She wasn't naive, just hopeful. So when she told him she was pregnant, she didn't expect a fairy tale, but she never expected silence either. At first, he said he needed time to think. A few days later, he was gone. No note, no goodbye, just absence. Selene gave birth to their daughter, Arya, alone in a quiet hospital room, no hand to hold, no name beside hers on the birth certificate, just her and a newborn, both new to a world that didn't seem to care. It should have broken her, but it didn't. She got up the next day, fed her baby, and began building a life no one thought she could handle. She worked nights cleaning offices, early mornings pouring coffee. In the hours between, she held Arya close, humming lullabies with cracked lips and sleep-deprived eyes. Her strength was invisible to most, but it never disappeared. When Arya turned 2, Selene had learned to function like a machine, smiles on command. "I'm fine without blinking." She kept her head down and her walls up. Until Dante. He wasn't like Micah. He was older, more stable. He didn't sing in streets or promise stars. He brought groceries, fixed her leaking faucet, and made Arya laugh until she snorted. Selene didn't fall fast this time. She tried to resist, but Dante stayed, and staying meant something. For 6 months he was there, until she told him she was pregnant. That night his voice changed. His smile disappeared. The next morning he was gone too. All he left was a note that read, "You're strong, you'll figure it out. I'm just not ready." Another man who claimed to admire her strength, right before he ran from it. Now, 4 months pregnant with one child in her arms and another growing inside her, Selene lives in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. She shares her bed with Arya. She skips meals some nights just so her daughter doesn't have to. She wears second-hand clothes and layers them to hide her belly beneath her cafe apron. The world didn't give her rest, but she keeps showing up anyway. Not for thanks, not for applause, for Arya, For the child still growing. For herself, even on the days when believing in herself feels impossible. Because love, real love, doesn't always come in the form of someone choosing you. Sometimes it starts when you choose to keep going. The car door opened before she could think. Cassian stepped out, his frame cutting through the cold like it didn't touch him. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, at the child in her arms, the trembling in her jaw, the way she shifted to shield Arya from the wind. "You're locked out," he said plainly. She didn't answer, just tightened her grip around Arya, blinking fast against the cold. Cassian glanced at the cafe door, then back at her. "Get in." Selene's eyes narrowed. "I'm fine. You're shivering." "I said I'm fine." Arya stirred against her shoulder, half asleep and starting to cry. Her tiny fingers clung to Selene's collar. The wind slipped beneath Selene's coat like it was trying to rip her open. Cassian looked at the child again, then back at Selene. "You're not the one I'm worried about." That did it. She hesitated only a moment longer before walking toward the car. He opened the door for her, stepped aside, and said nothing as she climbed in, holding Arya close to her chest. The warmth hit instantly. The seats were soft, and the heater hummed low. Arya calmed down the moment they were out of the cold. Cassian got back behind the wheel. For a moment there was just silence between them. She braced herself for questions, but none came. No small talk, no polite curiosity. He simply drove. They rode in quiet for a while, the streets outside blurry through the fogged windows. Selene watched him from the corner of her eye. His jaw was clenched, but not in anger. It was something else, focus, restraint, like he had 1,000 things to say but no interest in saying any of them. He pulled up outside a building that looked like it belonged to someone else's life. Wide glass panels, stone walls, a doorman who nodded without needing a word. "I have space," Cassian said. "Finally, I'm not your problem." He didn't answer, just stepped out and opened the door for her again. Selene looked down at Arya, now fully asleep, cheek pressed to her shoulder, then back at the man waiting outside. She didn't have options, so she stepped out. The elevator ride was quiet, the penthouse even quieter. Clean lines, cold floors, walls with nothing on them. Arya stirred as Selene laid her gently on the edge of a wide, unfamiliar bed. Cassian stood in the doorway, watching but not intruding. Selene finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes. "Because you didn't ask me for anything. Let me ask you something, real. Have you ever met someone who didn't need to speak to understand you? Someone who saw the pain in your silence and chose to stay anyway? If that struck a nerve, if you've felt that quiet ache before, don't scroll away. Hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this don't just pass time. They touch something deeper." Cassian didn't ask personal questions. Not that first night. Not the next morning. Not even when Arya sat barefoot on his marble kitchen counter, eating toast with jelly fingers and swinging her little legs like she'd lived there forever. He just watched. Watched Selene move through his space like she was trying not to leave fingerprints. Watched her flinch every time Arya's laugh got too loud. Watched her fold her hands over her belly whenever she thought no one was looking. It wasn't until the 4th day that she spoke about it. They were in the kitchen. She was making tea, her hands careful, her back stiff. He leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled, unread newspaper on the island. She glanced at him once. Then again. Then said it like she was spitting out something stuck in her throat. "I'm 4 months." He looked up. "Pregnant," she added, even though she didn't need to. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just nodded once. "Where's the father?" he asked. "Gone." A pause. Cassian didn't ask how or why. He just stood still, his eyes steady on hers. Not soft, not cold, just real. "And the first?" he asked quietly. "Your daughters? Also gone." She expected something then. Pity, discomfort, a retreat. But he didn't look away. Didn't say anything awkward or rehearsed. He simply reached into the cabinet, took down a clean mug and handed it to her. As if to say, "You don't owe me an explanation. But if you ever want to give one, I'll be here." That night, he set up a guest room for Arya. Picked out sheets that still had tags on them. Opened drawers that had never been used. Selene stared at the space like it might disappear. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I know. She's not your responsibility. I know, and I'm not staying forever." He didn't respond to that. He just walked past her, paused at the door, and said, "You're not the first person to leave, but you'll be the first I ever asked to stay." She didn't answer. But the next morning, she was still there. The change didn't happen all at once. It crept in like sunlight through a half-closed curtain. One morning, Arya left a purple crayon on the coffee table. Cassian noticed it during a meeting call, the way it rolled when he shifted in his chair. He picked it up and stared at the tiny tooth marks along the edge. 2 nights later, Selene's laughter echoed down the hallway. She was reading to Arya, something about animals wearing pajamas. Her voice rose and fell with each page. Arya laughed so hard she snorted, then laughed harder because of it. Cassian stood in the hallway unseen. He didn't move, just listened. That laugh. He hadn't realized how much the apartment had been missing something until he heard it. Not music, life. Selene started cooking in the mornings. Nothing extravagant, just eggs, toast, pancakes cut into odd shapes when Arya asked for clouds. Cassian never asked for a plate, but one was always left out for him. Sometimes he ate it, sometimes he didn't, but the gesture stayed with him. He came home one evening to find a single drawing taped to the fridge. Crayon scribbles and stick figures labeled Mommy, Me, and Mr. C. He paused, stared at it longer than he meant to. Selene noticed the shift too, the way he stood closer now, not intrusively, just near, listening, watching. One night, she caught him kneeling by Arya's chair, quietly tying her shoelace. He didn't know anyone saw. She didn't say a word about it. But later that night, when she was folding laundry on the couch, she glanced at him across the room and said softly, "Thank you." Cassian looked up from his glass. For what? For not walking away? He didn't answer right away, just swirled the drink in his hand, then looked at her with a calm she hadn't seen before. Maybe I was tired of walking. He wasn't used to softness, not the kind that didn't demand anything, not the kind that filled a room without trying. He found himself lingering outside the nursery door after Arya fell asleep, just listening to Selene whisper stories into the dark. Her voice was gentle, measured, safe. That night, she spoke to her unborn child too. "I hope you grow up in a world where people stay," she whispered. Cassian heard every word. He stood there for a long time, and when he finally turned away, something heavy in his chest had shifted. It was just after midnight when Selene screamed. Not loud, not enough to wake the building, but enough to wake Cassian. He sat up instantly, heart hammering, listening. Another muffled cry, sheets rustling, then silence. He crossed the hallway barefoot, the floor cold beneath him. When he reached her door, it was slightly open. Selene sat upright in bed, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her chest. Her hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat. Arya still slept beside her, untouched by the storm Selene had just fought in her sleep. Cassian didn't say anything. He didn't ask what happened. He just knocked, lightly. She turned toward the sound, eyes wild for a second, until she saw him. She nodded once as if to say, "You can come in." He stepped inside, not bothering with the light. The soft glow from the hallway spilled enough into the room to show her tears. She didn't wipe them away. He sat on the edge of the bed, just beside her, still silent, just there. For a while they didn't speak. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "They always leave." Cassian looked at her, really looked. She wasn't talking about Micah or Dante. Not just them. She was talking about a lifetime of people who promised things they never intended to keep. She was talking about nights waiting for doors that never opened again. He didn't tell her that he wouldn't leave. She wouldn't have believed it yet. Words were easy. She'd heard them before. So instead, he reached out slowly and placed his hand over hers, the one still pressed to her chest. Her hand trembled, but she didn't pull away. She leaned into him, not with drama or desperation, but like someone who'd been carrying her own weight for too long and finally, just for a second, needed to set it down. He let her. She rested her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her back, anchoring her without holding too tight, and they stayed like that. Minutes passed. Then she exhaled. Not the kind of breath that comes from lungs, but the kind that escapes the soul when it's tired. Cassian felt something inside him shift. He wasn't used to being needed in silence. This wasn't business. This wasn't control. This wasn't about giving answers. It was just being there. And for a man who had spent most of his life keeping people at a distance, this simple nearness felt like something terrifying and beautiful. The next morning, something small had changed. Selene didn't flinch when Cassian brushed past her in the kitchen. She let her fingers graze his wrist for a second too long when handing him the sugar. He didn't pull away. And later that afternoon, when Arya insisted on a tea party in the living room, Selene asked him, with a soft grin, "Would you like to attend as our guest of honor?" Cassian said yes. He wore a paper crown, drank invisible tea, and let Arya serve him toast crusts on a plastic saucer. Selene watched him from across the room, a strange light in her eyes, like seeing something she wasn't ready to admit out loud. That night, after Arya had fallen asleep, Selene wandered into the kitchen in one of his oversized shirts. Her belly was showing now, round, full of life, and Cassian looked at her like he couldn't decide whether to run or kneel. They sat on the floor, backs against the cabinets. The room was dim, the only light coming from the under-counter strip, casting everything in quiet warmth. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" she asked. He looked over. To what? To the moment before everything got complicated. He thought about it, then shook his head. "No, I don't think I ever lived before this." Selene swallowed hard. Her eyes stayed on the floor, voice barely above a breath. "I'm scared. Of me? Of needing someone again." He didn't rush in with reassurances. He just let the silence stretch until it wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Then slowly he turned to her. "You don't have to need me. Just let me stay." Her eyes met his, raw, unsure, full of quiet yearning. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. She didn't move. When he leaned in, it was slow, careful, like asking a question without words. She answered with a nod so slight it could have been a breath. Their lips met. There was no urgency, no hunger, just relief. The kind that came after holding something in for too long. Cassian kissed her like she was made of something soft and breakable, like her story lived beneath her skin, and he wanted to hear every word. Selene's hand slid to his shoulders, grounding herself in his warmth. Her breath caught as his fingers traced her spine, not out of fear but release. They moved to the bedroom without speaking, laid down as if afraid noise would break whatever was blooming between them. Cassian undressed her gently, his touch reverent, never rushed. He kissed her shoulder, her collarbone, the stretch marks along her hips, not with pity, but with honor. Selene ran her fingers through his hair, her voice a quiet whisper between kisses. "Thank you." They made love slowly, no act of possession, no pretending, only a man learning how to hold someone who'd never truly been held. And a woman learning that letting go didn't always mean falling apart. Later, they lay in the stillness, tangled beneath the sheets, his hand resting over her belly, her breath finally even. For once, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt full. If this part hit your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a sister, someone who's forgotten that softness still exists. Like this video if it moved you, and subscribe to stay connected to stories that don't just pass the time. They make you feel something. It was supposed to be just another morning. Selene was tidying up the living room, humming to herself, while Arya built towers out of couch cushions. Cassian had left early for a board meeting. The apartment was quiet, too quiet maybe, but peaceful. She found the envelope while putting away a folder from the console table, unmarked, light pink, tucked between files it didn't belong with. She opened it, expecting invoices or some formal document, but what she pulled out made her chest tighten. There was no greeting, no signature, just sharp, looping handwriting on creamy paper. "I warned you, Cassian. These women see a man like you and think child support is a business plan. You'll end up raising kids that aren't yours and paying for lives you didn't ruin. Don't let your loneliness make you stupid." Selene blinked, once, twice, as if rereading would change the words, but they were still there, each line pressing against wounds that hadn't fully closed. She sat down on the edge of the couch, the letters shaking in her hands. The air felt thinner somehow, like it didn't want to fill her lungs. Her stomach tightened, not from the baby, but from the memory of every look, every whisper, every assumption she had tried to ignore for months. And suddenly, every kind thing Cassian had done, every plate of food left out for her, every look that lingered too long, twisted into something else. Pity, guilt, obligation. She was nothing but a burden in a beautiful cage. A woman with too much baggage, a belly full of someone else's child, a little girl who didn't belong in his world. She pressed her hands against her face, breathing hard. Arya peeked over the pillow wall. "Mommy?" Selene looked up, blinking away the sting in her eyes. "Hey, baby," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Want to go on a little adventure?" She packed quickly. Just the essentials, a few clothes, a photo of Arya as a baby, a tattered stuffed animal, and the pair of shoes that still fit her swollen feet. She didn't touch the room Cassian had made for Arya, didn't take the new clothes, or the little lavender blanket she'd started to love. She didn't want reminders, just distance. Selene sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and one of Arya's coloring pages. The back was blank. She didn't need many words. Thank you for showing me what it felt like to rest. For the mornings without fear. For the quiet. I won't be the mistake that confirms their warnings. I'm sorry. She left the note where she knew he'd see it, right next to his untouched mug. Then she picked up her daughter, kissed her temple, and walked out the door before she could change her mind. Cassian returned home that evening expecting the usual. Selene curled up on the couch, book in hand. Arya running barefoot in circles, the gentle chaos of something that felt like a family, even if no one had dared to say the word aloud. But the lights were off. The apartment was too still. He loosened his tie, set his keys down, and instinctively glanced toward the kitchen. Then he saw it. The mug, still full, untouched, and beneath it, the corner of a page torn and child-sized. He picked it up. Her handwriting stopped him cold. He didn't sit. He didn't breathe. He just read. Each line hit like a punch to the ribs. I won't be the mistake that confirms their warnings. His throat tightened. What warning? He moved through the apartment faster now. Called out once. Selene. Nothing. Her room was empty. The closet half bare, drawers opened, one of Arya's toys left behind on the floor. That's when he saw the letter. His ex's handwriting. He recognized it instantly. He didn't need to read it. He remembered every word. He'd shoved it aside weeks ago, never replied, never even meant to keep it. But he hadn't destroyed it, and now it had done exactly what it was written to do. He pressed his hand against the kitchen counter, staring down at the words Selene left behind. His chest felt hollow. This wasn't like his past. This wasn't just someone leaving. This was loss. This was what it felt like to build something without realizing it, only to wake up and find the walls gone. He thought of Arya's laugh echoing through the hall, the way Selene whispered to the child in her belly, the warmth in the air that hadn't been there before she arrived. Gone. And for the first time in his life, Cassian didn't know what to do next. The next morning, he skipped the meetings, shut off his phone, poured coffee and didn't drink it. Paged through his own security logs, searching for any clue about where they might have gone. He checked the train station first, then the shelter downtown. Nothing. By nightfall, he was in his car, driving through neighborhoods he'd never set foot in before. He stopped by the cafe where they'd met, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, hoping to see a silhouette at the window. There was nothing. He found her on the third night. It was just past midnight when Cassian turned onto a quiet back road in a town an hour from the city. His headlights swept across old brick storefronts, most of them empty. But one stood out, not because of its sign, but because of the faint light inside a car parked out front. The car was familiar. So was the figure curled in the front seat. He pulled over, engine still running. For a few seconds he just sat there. It was her. Selene was asleep, arms wrapped around Arya, who lay sprawled across her lap. A baby blanket covered the child's legs, but Selene had none. Her sweater was pulled up to her chin, hands gripping the steering wheel even in her sleep. The sign above the building behind her read, "For Lease, Flower Shop." Cassian stepped out quietly, approaching the car as if it might vanish if he moved too quickly. He tapped the glass once, gently. Selene jolted upright. Arya stirred, then went back to sleep with a tiny whimper. Their eyes met through the glass. Hers widened. She slowly unlocked the door, her hand trembling. Cassian opened it but didn't speak right away. He crouched down beside her, his voice low. "You left without letting me fight for you." Tears filled her eyes. "I didn't want to be the reason you regretted staying." He shook his head. "You were the reason I stayed at all." She broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold everything in. The shame, the fear, the longing, the regret. "I thought once you saw what I really was, just a woman with nothing but stories and stretch marks, you'd realize they were right." Cassian said nothing. He stepped closer, dropped to his knees, and gently placed his head against her belly. His hands rested on either side, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear again. "I already changed," he said softly. "Not because you asked me to, because being near you made it impossible not to." Selene's breath caught. Her fingers slid through his hair as she whispered, "I was so scared." "I know. I thought I'd ruined it. You didn't." He stayed there, grounded by the sound of her heartbeat and the life growing inside her. For the first time in days, he felt whole again. Not fixed, not saved, but home. Selene didn't speak on the drive back. She held Arya close, her eyes fixed on the dark road ahead, but her hand never left Cassian's. Their fingers stayed intertwined between the seats, silent, steady. When they pulled up to the building, she hesitated before stepping out. Cassian opened the door and waited for her to move at her own pace. Inside the apartment, everything was as they left it. Her shoes still by the door, Aria's toy still lying on the rug, the drawing on the fridge, Mommy, me, and Mr. C hadn't been touched. Selene stood in the center of the room, taking it all in like she was seeing it for the first time. Cassian came up behind her, voice quiet. "You're not here because I pity you." She nodded slowly. "You're not here because I feel guilty." Another nod. He stepped closer. "You're here because I never learned how to breathe until you walked in." Her eyes filled again, but this time she didn't look away. She turned and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head on his chest. He held her close, burying his face in her hair. Her belly pressed softly between them, a quiet reminder of everything they had to protect now. They stood that way until Aria wandered in, rubbing her eyes, whispering, "Mommy?" Selene knelt down and hugged her tight, whispering, "We're home." That night, they didn't talk much. They just moved around each other with a quiet rhythm. Cassian made tea. Selene tucked Aria into bed. They folded blankets together, shared one last look across the living room, and walked into the bedroom hand in hand. There was no grand speech, no need for one, just presence, just peace. And when Selene slipped beneath the covers, her body curled gently toward his, Cassian whispered one promise into the space between them. "I'm not going anywhere. Stories like this don't end. They begin again, every day. If this moment touched something in you, if you've ever wanted to believe that love doesn't leave, tap the subscribe button and stay with us. Because the heart of Mr. Ross' story trail isn't just storytelling. It's about reminding people that even the most guarded souls can learn how to stay. Like the video if you're still with us. Share it with someone who needs a reason to hope again. And remember, some people don't rescue you. They stand beside you until you remember how to breathe. The doors opened with a soft creak, the kind that came from old wood and new beginnings. Marlowe and Vale Floral Boutique was small, 2 rooms and a sunlit corner near the window. But to Selene, it was everything she'd ever wanted. The walls were painted in calming shades of sage and ivory. Ribbons in muted tones hung near the counter. Dried bouquets lined the shelves in delicate bundles. Fresh arrangements stood tall in clear vases, their petals open like hands ready to hold. Selene stood behind the register, fingertips grazing the worn surface of the counter Cassian had refinished himself. She wore a soft blue wrap dress that hugged her belly gently. 8 months pregnant now, glowing not from glamour but from something quieter. Stability. Peace. Cassian entered carrying Aria, who had insisted on wearing a white tutu and sparkly shoes for the grand opening. "She says she's your assistant today," he said with a grin. Selene smiled. "Perfect. She knows how to charm customers better than I ever could." He set Aria down, and the little girl ran to the back room to check on the flower baskets, serious about her new title. Selene turned toward him. "Can you believe this?" Cassian looked around. "Yeah, I can. Not long ago, I couldn't even imagine owning something like this." He stepped closer, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You didn't just imagine it. You built it. I just held the ladder." Selene laughed softly, leaning into his touch. Outside, the first customer arrived, a woman with a quiet smile and curious eyes. Selene welcomed her in, guiding her to the wildflower section. Cassian stayed back, watching her move through her space like she'd always belonged there. And she had. All she'd needed was someone who believed she deserved more than survival. 3 weeks later, in the still hours before dawn, Ivy was born. It wasn't an easy labor, but Selene was calm, her hand wrapped around Cassian's, her voice steady. He never let go, not once, not when she winced, not when she cried, not even when her fingers dug into his palm so hard it left marks. And when Ivy let out her first cry, Cassian broke. His shoulders shook as he held their daughter for the first time, this tiny blinking piece of everything they'd survived. "She's perfect," he whispered. Selene smiled through tears. "She has your hands." But it wasn't just the baby in his arms that brought him to his knees. It was what came after. A week later, with Selene resting on the couch and Ivy sleeping in her crib, Cassian knelt before Aria. He held a small envelope in his hand. "Can I ask you something important?" Aria tilted her head. He opened the envelope and showed her a certificate with both their names printed at the top. "I'd like to be your dad. Not just in how I feel, but for real. Would that be okay?" Aria blinked, then launched herself into his arms. Yes! From that day on, she was Aria Vale. Not because of ink on paper, but because she had someone who chose her, not by accident, not out of guilt, but by heart. Their life didn't become perfect. There were early mornings, missed alarms, messy breakfasts, and flower deliveries that ran late. But they were together. Cassian learned to make pancakes without burning them. Selene taught Ivy how to fall asleep to lullabies hummed softly on the shop floor. Arya asked questions at the breakfast table that made them all laugh and sometimes cry. And every evening, when the shop closed and the house went quiet, Cassian sat on the porch with Selene, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. No longer afraid of closeness, no longer hiding from love, just living in it. Not all love begins loudly. Sometimes it starts in the quiet, in the worn-down moments, in the fragile space between heartbreak and hope. Selene didn't need saving. She needed someone to see her, not just her struggle, but her worth. She carried a child, raised another, worked tired shifts and wiped away tears without anyone noticing. And when the world told her she should be grateful for any kindness, she chose to walk away from people who only offered pieces. Cassian wasn't searching for connection, but in the warmth of a mother's voice and a little girl's laughter, he remembered what it meant to be human again. He didn't fall in love with perfection. He found meaning in presence. Because the truth is, love isn't about flawless timing or flawless people. It's about someone choosing you, again and again, not for what you offer, but for who you are when you're no longer pretending. Selene was never too much. Her child didn't make her less desirable. Her story didn't make her less deserving. She was whole all along, and Cassian didn't fix her. He stood beside her long enough for her to feel safe putting the pieces down. That's what real healing looks like. It's not loud, it's not grand, it's quiet, steady, and full of presence. Because love is not a rescue, it's a decision. And motherhood, it doesn't lessen a woman, it deepens her. It shows her what sacrifice looks like, what strength sounds like when no one's watching. So if you're holding on by a thread, if you've ever felt left behind or overlooked, remember this. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You don't need to be quiet to be accepted. You don't need to shrink to fit into someone else's idea of enough. Someone out there will see your story and stay. And when they do, let them. Like this video if something in your heart shifted. Comment if you've ever needed to hear these words. Share this with someone who feels forgotten. Subscribe to stay close to stories that speak to the parts of you that still believe in love, healing, and quiet strength. Because the right story doesn't distract you. It reminds you of who you really are. And maybe, just maybe, you've been worthy all along.